Hi everyone. This is the last brief lecture, the third brief lecture on Chapter 8, and this lecture is going to deal with goal setting and goals. Well, we obviously know how important goals are to the planning process. It's what actually initiates the planning process, the setting and the identification of goals. Well, what makes great goals? We see here in this diagram that there are five different characteristics of great goals. They must be, or they must have, these five attributes in order for them to be really valuable to the planning process. And we're going to look at these five and how they actually help in terms of goal management and goal setting. The first attribute is specificity. Desired outcomes must be clear to anyone. Too often when we set goals, those goals are vague and ambiguous. Well, what's the problem with setting vague or ambiguous goals? Well, there are many problems associated with that. One obvious problem is that we don't necessarily know what we're trying to accomplish. We don't really know what we're trying to accomplish, and if we don't know what we're trying to accomplish, we don't get the focus that comes from goal setting. We don't have a good focus, we don't have a motivation because we're not necessarily sure what we want to attain. And I give you an example. I can say that one of my goals for this summer is to trim down, to lose some weight. Okay, well, I'm not sure if I say that to someone, they might not be sure about exactly what I want to accomplish. Well, do I want to lose 2 pounds? Do I want to lose 10 pounds? Do I want to lose 50 pounds? It isn't very specific, and so the problem with the lack of specificity is that I cannot necessarily, one, know what I want to do, and two, very importantly, know if or when I have achieved it. So when do I actually know that I've trimmed down? When will I decide that? Or how can somebody else who's evaluating my performance decide that? The goal is not specific enough. We need specific goals. An organization cannot just simply say, we want to do well next year. Well, what does that mean? Give me a number. Why do I need a number? Because a number or some sort of specific goal, it can guide us, it can direct us, it can focus us, it can create incentives, it can allow us, again, to evaluate whether or not we have achieved what we hope to achieve. When there is a number in place, there is something that we can all focus on and we can all draw our attention to. Think about it from the perspective of running a race. What if you did not know where the finish line was? Would you be very focused? Would you be very motivated? How would you know when you have finished a race? You wouldn't want to run a race like that. You want a specific outcome. You want to know what is required of you. What do I need to do? What do I need to achieve? That's the most important, I should say, one of the most important parts of a great goal. Secondly, the goal must be attainable. The goal must be attainable. It's all great, and you'll see in an instant we'll talk about challenging goals. It's all great to challenge yourself, to set goals that actually require some effort from you. That effort, again, provides that level of motivation, that action orientation. But you cannot be unrealistic in your goals. For example, Xavier cannot expect in the next 2 years or 5 years or perhaps even 10 years to acquire the same level of enrollment that Harvard University has. It is simply unattainable, impossible, unrealistic. If you set an unrealistic goal for yourself, you will, one, likely fail in your attempt to achieve that goal, and if you fail, you will become despondent and you will not be motivated to continue towards achieving anything. So unrealistic goals actually can work against you in terms of fulfilling your plan and fulfilling your objectives. You want them to be realistic. You want them, while being realistic though, to also be, as I said, challenging. What if I said my goal for this summer in terms of losing weight is to lose half a pound? Well, just speaking to you right now in this summer heat, I probably lost a half a pound. Yeah, I have attained my goal, but it's not very challenging. It's not very challenging. And if we don't set challenging goals, we are likely to maybe perhaps be improved, but not necessarily create and sustain competitive advantage. We want to do better than we have done before, but we want to challenge ourselves. But always be mindful that the goals as well must be attainable. The fourth characteristic or attribute of successful goals are measurability. You have no doubt when accomplished or missed. So again, that has a link to specificity. Specifically, what I want to do, I need to be able to measure that. Why is measurement important? Because it will help me to understand and identify whether or not I have achieved my goals or whether I have failed and I need to do something else. So you have to find ways of measuring. Businesses have lots of measures in which they use to identify whether they've accomplished their goals. They can measure profitability in terms of return on investment. They can look at cost structure. They can look at sustainability factors and measurements. All of those things, your goals must be measurable. We don't want to say at Xavier, for example, that we want to have greater student involvement or greater student interaction and not have a way of measuring that. How will we know if we've accomplished that? How will we know if we are interacting and making our students' life better if we cannot measure that? We have to find some way, whether that be through a survey, whether that be through observation, some way of putting a measure, some attempt to put numbers in some way to quantify that goal that we are trying to accomplish. And the last thing is timely. It must be linked to some due date and some timetable. I can't say, well, I want to lose some weight, but I'll give myself a while. Well, no. If you give yourself a while, if you give yourself too long, you don't put any due dates or timetables on it, then what is likely to happen is that, again, one, you're likely to lose focus. Two, you're likely to lose your motivation. Three, you won't be able to necessarily evaluate if you are accomplishing or you are on the right path because you don't really have any timetable set. You don't have a process in place. You don't have deadlines in place. So you can't necessarily know if you're following through on the plan and if you're accomplishing the goal. So goals are often better when they're tied to some kind of timetables. I remember when I was doing my dissertation, and some of you may go on to do a PhD or a graduate degree, which will require you to do a thesis or a dissertation. It's a very long, sometimes intensive process. And it's something that a goal that you need to really compartmentalize and have timeliness attached to. You need to have deadlines and give yourself certain due dates, because in that way you can see whether or not you are attaining your goal and what needs to be done in an effort, if you need to speed up, if you need to do things differently to ensure that you are or that you meet your objective at the designated time. So always remember that when you are determining your goals, when you are identifying the best objectives, you want to have these characteristics. You want them to be specific. You want them to be attainable. Specific, again, making sure that it's clear to anyone. They know exactly what you want to achieve. It's not something like, I want to be the best that I can be. I want to be all things. That's great. It sounds wonderful. But what is if you say that to anyone, it will be very hard for them to interpret. It has to be attainable. You want it to be realistic, something that you can accomplish, recognizing where you are, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and also the opportunities available to you in the environment. But at the same time, they must be challenging. They must. In this chapter, it mentions stretch goals, kind of pushing you away from your comfort level, getting you perhaps into new things, doing things differently. That will lead to this innovation and that competitive advantage we talked about. Of course, measurable, some way of evaluating whether the goals have been achieved, or whether they haven't been achieved, and obviously the last one, timely, setting the due dates, having the deadlines, keeping yourself on track. So that is, in a nutshell, some pointers to help you in terms of goal setting and goal management.